So Apeirogon is a novel about two living men, one Israeli, one Palestinian, who come together in sort of united grief. They each lose their daughters in separate incidents in Israel and in Palestine, and then by force of friendship, by force of circumstance, they came together and became friends, and now they travel the world, Rami and Bassam, telling the stories of their daughters. And I think it is because they want to keep, like Scheherazade, they want to keep their daughters alive. It's a story of friendship, it's a story of love, but it's also a story of violence, grief, difficulty, and overcoming all of those things. I mean, it's almost a cliche to say, why did I choose this story? And I say it chose me. But you know, it came along and I met them in Jerusalem, or Beit Jala, actually outside Jerusalem. And the force of their story blew my heart wide open. And I knew I was changed the moment I met them. And sometimes as a writer, you work towards those things that obsess you. And this obsessed me, and I knew I had to write about it. I also, at the time, knew nothing about Israel and Palestine. It was a complete, confusion for me. It's still a confusion, actually, nowadays. But guess what? It's also a confusion for Rami. It's also a confusion for Bassam. And I think part of it is acknowledging that confusion, that the world is messy. It's not full of simple answers. There's no such thing as a single truth. But there is a sort of essential moral truth that Rami and Bassam personify in an extraordinary way. Why do we need stories? Because stories are the atoms of what we are. They're the molecules. They're the quarks. We are built of stories. We are nothing without stories. We can live without books. We could. We could live without films. We could. We could live without art. But we can't live without each other, and we find each other in our stories. So stories are like the fundamental to how we exist. And we sort of say to the world, listen to my story. But even more profound is listening to somebody else's story. And this is where the real beauty comes in. The mind, when it tells a story, is like a circus. They map the mind and the colors and the light. The mind, when it tells somebody else's story, is like a carnival. There's all sorts of things that it accesses. So I think saying that the world is full of stories is not even enough. We must understand that those stories matter. Narrative 4 brings young people together to share the power of storytelling, to understand one another, and then to use the power of storytelling and what they have learned to go out and change the world. So I believe that stories can change the world. I also fundamentally believe that there's a young generation there that have the power to emerge. And emerge is an important word because it is almost an emergent movement, in the sense that they're greater than the sum of our parts. And all of these stories together can affect change. And let's face it, we're living in really rough, broken times. And one of the few things I think that we have to repair ourselves and maybe this crazy planet that we live on is the power of storytelling. I think we can constantly improve our empathy. We've got to be empathetic for our failure in being empathetic. I think we have to listen. And we have to listen widely. And we have to cast our net way beyond ourselves. Because, so many of us we're just coming indoors, we're closing the curtains, we're putting a sort of GPS coordinate on our imagination and saying, this is the only place that I will go. And I believe that with stories and storytelling, we can increase the size of the country of empathy by accessing one another in our differences. Sometimes our crazy, violent, unpeaceful differences. And this is one of the things that stories can do. It's not something easy. It's not something you just throw up it there in the air and say, "Oh, yeah, it's kumbaya." This is not what it is. It's these stories can break your heart. They can take away your house. They can take away your country. They can take away your life. We have to acknowledge the power of that and the power of one another. So I think getting in narrative 4, getting young people together to tell one another's stories, they become so much bigger than themselves. I mean, to sit inside this airship and just to look outside and to look inside at the same time, I feel like I am in the middle of a huge and important sort of story. I mean, this place where we sit right now is a feat of the imagination. It sort of defies some principles of what we think of as, science and even art. But it proves that human beings can do, just about anything. We can put an airship up in the air, bring people together, and start telling stories to one another, and not just the easy stories, but the tough stories too. And so for me, this seems to me like a work of literature, because it's such a work of spectacular imagination. And yeah, it'd be nice to have these airships in every city in the world. Now there's an idea. Maybe we bring docks everywhere.